When the doctor told me my lungs were failing from that mysterious disease and I only had 8 months left, I knew I couldn't bear the pain any longer. I figured sharing my story might be my last chance to find some peace before I meet my grandfather in heaven and my father in the hell he made for himself. Good morning, my dear friends. I'm Eleanor Rose Thompson, but everyone in Millbrook, Indiana, knows me as Miss Lou in the park. I was already 82 years old, and every wrinkle on my face held a different story. Some were from joy, and some from heartache. Today, I want to share the most meaningful one from my life. There's something I've never fully told, not even to my own children. But before I go on, I ask you to pay attention for a moment. If this old lady touches you in any way, leave an amen in the comments. Every message from you lifts my spirits on this final journey that the Lord has set for me. And let me know which city you're watching from. I love imagining how the internet can carry my voice to places I've never seen. If you can hit the like button, my granddaughter says it's really important. Now, let's get into the story. I was born in 1943 in a simple wooden house by Mill Creek. Back then, our town was just a tiny spot on the map where everyone knew each other. And gossip spread faster than the wind. It was full of springs and family secrets buried deeper than the roots of the old oak trees. My mother, Clara, was a beautiful woman with fair skin and long hair down to her waist. She worked as a seamstress, bent over her sewing machine day and night, making dresses for women and shirts for men. She didn't smile much, and she spoke even less. Now, I understand her silence wasn't just her nature, it was fear. My father, Henry, worked at the only sawmill in town. He was a big man with strong, heavy hands. Respected on the streets but feared at home. They called him strong-willed. But now I know the truth. He was a cruel man who spoke sweetly in public but used his fists behind closed doors. And then there was my grandfather, Samuel, my mother's father. When I close my eyes, I can still smell the tobacco on his clothes, see his blue eyes like the July sky, and hear his laughter like music. He lived with us after my grandmother passed. In the little room out back overlooking the yard, he was a retired builder, but his hands never stopped creating. He made wooden chairs, cloth dolls, and little toys that colored my childhood in ways my father tried to erase. My grandfather was the one who really raised me. Even though we all lived under the same roof, he was the one waiting for me after school, teaching me to read when the teacher said I was slow, kissing my scraped knees and saying, "A child's pain fades faster than morning dew in the sun. Little Lucy," he used to say. Some people are born with sunshine in their chest and some with storms. Your father was born in a storm. It's not his fault. But don't let the rain dim your joy. My father humiliated me for any reason at all. If I got bad grades, it was because I was as dumb as a mule. If I dropped a glass, it was because I was clumsier than a cow on ice. If I took too long on a chore, I was as lazy as my useless mother. Nothing I did was right. Nothing about me deserved praise or encouragement or a father's love. The punishments came often and were brutal. I remember kneeling on corn kernels for hours because I answered back without meaning to. I was locked in the dark room without dinner for laughing at the table. I was whipped with a belt until my hands were red for being 5 minutes late to school. My mother watched it all with her eyes downcast and her hands trembling like spring leaves. She never stepped in directly. She didn't have the strength. But at night, when my father was asleep, she'd creep to my bed, rub herbal ointment on my bruises, and softly sing me to sleep. Even though I was no longer a child, it was my grandfather who truly protected me, even with his own limitations as an old man facing a brute. "Henry," he'd say firmly when my father raised his hand to me, "if you hit that girl again, you'll answer to me." And for some reason I never fully understood, my father backed down. Maybe it was the respect for elders back then. Or perhaps deep down he knew my grandfather was right. Or maybe, and I only realized this later, because he depended on my grandfather's pension to keep the family going. Those nights when my father worked the late shift at the sawmill were our quiet celebrations. My grandfather would pull out his old guitar, play country songs, teach me square dancing, and tell ghost stories that made me laugh more than fear. My mother seemed to change then, like a different woman. She'd smile, sing along, and even dare to make pumpkin candy. That was the joy of my childhood. It felt like the house could finally breathe when he was gone. My grandfather taught me to read properly, sitting with me on the back porch at sunset, using old newspapers the bar owner gave him, ads, anything written down, and making me read aloud, read slowly, but read right, he'd say, because a wrong word is like the wrong medicine. It does no good. My grandfather also nurtured my dream of building beautiful houses one day. When I was about 8, he gave me a sketchbook and colored pencils that he bought at the county fair with his small savings from his pension. "Draw the house you want to build when you grow up," he encouraged, and I did, drawing big houses with round windows, tree houses, homes with gardens full of bright flowers. My father tore up many of those drawings, saying I was filling my head with nonsense, that poor girls had no future beyond marriage and children. But my grandfather always hid another notebook for me and said, "Keep drawing. Little Lucy, those who can draw their future have more chances to build it." Life went on like that for years, balanced between the terror my father imposed and the love my grandfather and mother tried to give me in their own ways. I grew up through falls and tears, clinging to peaceful moments like a shipwrecked person to pieces of wood. When I was 12, I started to understand more of what was happening in our home. One night, I woke to screams from my parents' room. The next day, my mother showed up with a black eye, saying she walked into a door. That's when I first saw my grandfather cry, sitting alone in the yard, staring into nothing. Oh, it breaks my heart to remember, but I need to tell it. If you're watching this video and you still have a grandparent, go hug them today. Tell them you love them. Listen to their old stories one more time. Remember their scent, the way they talk, because when they go, they take a part of us that never comes back. I still remember my grandfather's last advice to me. I was 14 at the time. It was a Sunday morning. We were sitting on the bench in the yard under the apple tree. He took my hand, looked deep into my eyes, and said, "Little Lucy, a lot of people will tell you that you can't, that you won't succeed, that poor folks' dreams don't come true. Don't believe them. Your head was made to think, not to bow down. Your legs were made to walk, not to kneel. And your heart was made to love, but also to fight. Never forget that 2 weeks after that, on a cold June morning like only Indiana can have, my grandfather didn't wake up. He went to sleep as usual, lying on his side with a gentle smile, as if he was having a pleasant dream, and he never came back. The doctor said it was his heart. It just stopped in the middle of the night. No warning, no pain, now goodbye. It was like the sun suddenly going out. The house, which was never cheerful, grew even darker. My mother cried for days, her silent tears flowing as she sewed, washed clothes, and cooked. And my father, he didn't show any sadness for his father-in-law's death. But there was a strange glint in his eyes that I only understood later. It was the worst kind of evil. The kind that waits for the right moment to strike. The funeral was short and simple. There weren't many people. A few co-workers from the sawmill, the bar, owner where he spent his money, and 2 or 3 distant relatives we hadn't seen in years. My mother wore black and stayed silent through the service, her face hidden behind a thin veil to cover whatever emotions she felt or didn't feel. I didn't shed a tear in that moment, watching his simple coffin lowered into the ground in our small town cemetery. I felt nothing but a strange emptiness, like a page in a book had turned to a new chapter. A dark chapter had closed forever. What none of us knew then was that when one chapter ends, another begins, brighter and full of hope. A chapter that would take me down paths I never imagined. Even in my wildest dreams, a real new beginning came a few days after the funeral, when the sawmill's lawyer called us in to handle the legal matters. That's where we discovered something surprising. My father, despite his flaws, had kept up his company life insurance, along with the accident benefits and his pension payments. It gave us stability and the chance for a fresh start with dignity. It seemed like, even in the worst actions, the Lord finds a way to turn them into blessings. My mother said that as we left the lawyer's office, we had a good cheque in hand and the promise of monthly payments that let us live simply but with self-respect. That same day, as we walked down the main street of town, we passed a small house for sale. It was a simple brick building with a little yard and a magnolia tree. My mother stopped and looked at it for a long time. then did something I hadn't seen her do in years. She smiled, a full smile that reached her eyes. "What do you think?" "Eleanor, could this be our new home? May the Lord be with us all. And if you can share this with someone who had a special grandfather, I'd be grateful. God bless you. My dears, may He wrap everyone in His holy robe." That evening, after we returned from the cemetery, the house felt emptier than usual. The little room out back, without my grandfather's guitar leaning against the wall, without his tobacco smell, without his presence, was like an open wound I avoided looking at. My mother went to bed early, saying she had a headache. I think she couldn't bear standing in the living room, staring at the empty chair where he used to sit every evening, listening to the radio. I stayed in the kitchen, washing the dishes after the burial coffee. My tears fell silently into the sink as I tried to understand how the world could keep turning without him. Outside, night fell quickly, as it does in winter. June of 1957 felt colder than any other month I'd known. Just then, I heard my father's footsteps entering the kitchen. He'd been at the bar after the funeral, something my mother didn't even try to stop. From the strong smell of alcohol and the way he walked, I could tell he'd drunk more than usual. "Where's your mother?" he asked. His voice slurred. "She's gone to bed." I answered without turning around, continuing to wash the dishes and silently praying he'd go to sleep too. I felt him come closer. The alcohol smell grew stronger, mixed with sweat and tobacco, a combination that still makes me sick to this day. "You know, Eleanor," he said. Getting so close, I could feel his hot breath on my neck. Now that the old man's protection game is over, I'm the only one in charge here. I froze, the wet dish slipping from my hand. There was something in his voice that made me alert, like a small animal sensing danger before seeing it. "I'll finish up here and go to bed too," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Even though my heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. Just then, I felt his large hand grab my arm and spin me around to face him. "You're not going anywhere," he said, and in his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. It wasn't just the usual anger. It was something else that made my blood run cold. "I've always wanted to teach you a lesson." The old man wouldn't let me, always getting in the way, saying you were just a child. "But look, you're not a child anymore." His eyes roamed over my teenage body in a way that made me want to disappear. Made me feel dirty, just from being looked at like that. "Dad, please let me go," I pleaded, my voice so weak I didn't want to hear it. He just gripped my arm tighter and pulled me down the hallway toward the room that had been my grandfather's. I tried to resist, to pull away, but it was like fighting a wall. He was too strong, and I was too small. "No one's going to protect you now. Eleanor," he said as he dragged me. "The old man is gone. Your mother's useless anyway. Now it's just you and me. What happened in that room, in the very room where my grandfather had passed just nights before? I've never told the details to anyone, and I won't now. There are things a woman has to carry alone. There are pains that words can't fully capture. I can only say that on that night, when the moon hid behind the clouds as if it didn't want to see, my father destroyed what was left of my childhood. He took something he had no right to take, soiled memories that should have been sacred, and turned my grandfather's room, once a haven of love and safety, into the scene of my worst nightmare. I remember looking out the window as it happened, seeing a small patch of sky through the old curtains, desperately searching for a star. Any sign that God or my grandfather was watching over me. But the sky that night was too dark. Even the stars refused to witness. When it was finally over, he left the room without a word, leaving me curled up in the corner like a wounded animal. I heard his heavy footsteps down the hallway. The door to his and my mother's room open and close. Then silence. I stayed there. I don't know for how long. Minutes or hours. Time lost all meaning. The physical pain blended with a deeper wound. One I knew, even in my innocence, would never fully heal. Eventually, I found the strength to stand. I stumbled to the small bathroom in the back of the house, where I washed with cold water, scrubbing my skin until it was red in a desperate effort to wash away the horror. I cried quietly, biting my lip to make no sound. The taste of blood mixing with my salty tears. I couldn't go back to my room next to my parents. Instead, I wrapped myself in an old blanket on the couch in the living room, shivering, not sure if from the cold or the fear, and prayed all the prayers my grandfather had taught me, begging that it was just a terrible nightmare and the sun would rise to take it away. But when dawn broke, bringing the cold winter light through the window cracks, the reality was still there. Heavy as lead on my young shoulders. It wasn't a nightmare. It had happened. And something inside me said it would happen again unless I did something. My mother was the first to wake up. Azuzers. When she saw me curled up on the couch, she paused, her eyebrows furrowed with worry. Eleanor, why are you sleeping here? Did you feel sick last night? I looked at her, searching deep inside for the courage to speak, to a cause, to ask for help. Mother, I began, my voice trembling. Last night, Dad. The words were too hard, stuck in my throat. How could I explain the unexplainable? How could I put something so horrific into simple sentences? But I didn't have to say it all. I saw in her face a flash of understanding, followed by an expression I'll never forget. A mix of horror, shame, and realization. As if she knew exactly what I meant because she had experienced it too. In my grandfather's room, I finally managed to say, tears flowing freely now, he hurt me. Mother, he hurt me in a terrible way. My mother dropped the basin of clothes she was carrying. In that precious moment, I saw in her eyes something I rarely saw. Anna. A deep, instinctive rage that only mothers feel when their child is threatened. She knelt in front of me, held my face in her hands, and said with an intensity that surprised me, "Listen to me, Eleanor. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. For the first time, I saw my mother as she truly was, not the weak, submissive woman I knew, but a woman carrying her own scars, hurt and healed so many times she barely recognized herself in the mirror. A woman who, despite everything, was trying to protect her child in the only way she knew how. In that brief moment of connection, I felt that maybe, just maybe, we had a chance to escape that hell together. But the moment was interrupted by the sound of the bedroom door opening. My father appeared in the hallway, still in his night clothes. Hair dishevelled, eyes red from the night before. "What's all this commotion?" he growled, looking at the clothes scattered on the floor. My mother quickly stood up, her moment of bravery vanishing as quickly as it came. I saw her shoulders slump under the invisible weight of fear. "Nothing. Henry," she stammered, bending down to pick up the clothes. Eleanor wasn't feeling well. Slept on the couch. "We're all sorted now." He looked from my mother to me, and I saw in his eyes that he knew. He knew I'd spoken, or at least tried to. And the worst part was, it didn't care. There was a challenge in his look, a certainty of his impunity that made me understand for the first time what it meant to be completely at someone's mercy. "Better be," he replied, heading to the kitchen. "And you, Eleanor, stop this nonsense and get ready for school." Isn't being stupid enough? How could I go to school? How could I pretend everything was normal after what happened? How could I sit at my desk learning fractions and verbs when my world had fallen apart? But I did. I put on my uniform, brushed my hair, grabbed my books, all in mechanical motions as if my body had disconnected from my mind. I kissed my mother's cheek before leaving, a daily habit. But this time, our eyes met for longer than a second, a silent moment full of shared pain, shame, and a plea for forgiveness from her for not protecting me better. That day at school, I sat at the back of the class and didn't say a word. The teacher called my name several times, concerned about my silence. But I barely heard her. It was like I was drowning. The sounds around me were muffled and distorted. At recess, my classmate Marion, my closest friend, came over and asked if I was sad about my grandfather. I nodded, grateful for the ready excuse. People were quick to think it was just grief. The truth was too heavy to share, too shameful to say. I came home dragging my feet, wishing the road would never end. The house that had been my refuge when my grandfather was alive had become a prison, a place of constant danger. Every corner, every shadow seemed to hold threats. What I didn't know was that the worst was yet to come. When I got home, I found my mother in the kitchen, her face freshly slapped, eyes swollen from crying, and my father sitting at the table waiting for me. "So you're making up stories," aren't you?" he said, as soon as I walked in, his voice calm in a dangerous way. "Lying about your own father, I immediately realized what had happened. He'd confronted my mother about our morning conversation, pried out of her what we knew, what we'd said. And now, with that frightening calm, he was accusing me of lying. They're not lies, I tried to say, finding some remnant of courage somewhere inside me. Maybe it was my grandfather's voice echoing in my memory. Maybe it was just survival instinct. "Do you know what you've done?" The slap came so fast, I didn't even see his hand move. I only felt the impact, my face burning, the metallic taste of blood from his ring cutting my lip. "Henry, please," my mother begged, stepping between us. "She's just a girl. She's confused from her grandfather's death. She doesn't know what she's saying. Get out of the way." "Clara," he growled, pushing her hard enough that she stumbled back against the stove. This girl needs to know who's in charge here. What happened next was the worst punishment I'd ever received up to that point. I won't describe the details. Some things are too hard to relive, even after decades. I can only say that I spent the next 3 days locked in the small back room, the one that had been my grandfather's. With just a plate of food a day and a bucket for necessities, I heard my mother crying on the other side of the door, begging him to let me out, saying I'd learned my lesson. But he wouldn't budge. In those 3 days of imprisonment, in the very room where I'd endured the abuse, something fundamental changed inside me. The fearful girl gave way to a different Eleanor. One who began to understand that survival sometimes means not just enduring pain, but planning an escape. Finding cracks in the system of terror, and believing that somehow, at some point, a way out would appear on the 3rd day. When he finally opened the door, smirking at the sight of me gaunt, dirty, with swollen eyes from crying, something in my eyes betrayed the change inside, because he frowned, as if seeing something unexpected. "Learned your lesson?" he asked, blocking the door with his massive frame. "Yes." "Father," I answered, bowing my head to hide what was really going on in my mind. I had learned, but not the lesson he wanted. Not about complete submission or accepting abuse as normal or paralyzing fear. I had learned that I had to survive at all costs until I found a way out. I had learned that sometimes you have to pretend the predator has won to make him lower his guard. I had learned that someday, somehow, justice would be served, even if I had to wait years. What I didn't expect was that I wouldn't have to wait as long as I feared. Because while I was going through that hell, isolated in that room, my mother, the woman I'd always seen as weak and submissive, was quietly planning our way out. The days that followed felt like walking on broken glass. Every step required caution, constant awareness, and certainty that any misstep could open new wounds. The house where I was born and raised had turned into a prison with invisible but very real walls. I went back to my routine at school. But I wasn't Eleanor anymore. the girl who used to raise her hand in class, doodle colourful houses in the margins of her notebooks, and sometimes smile shyly, had been replaced by a silent shadow sitting at the back. My eyes stayed glued to my notebook, avoiding all contact, as if afraid someone might see through me and uncover my shameful secret. Teacher Margaret noticed the change. One afternoon, she called me after class, her kind eyes behind her round glasses showing genuine concern. "Eleanor, what's wrong? Your grades are slipping. You're not participating anymore. I know you lost your grandfather, but it seems like there's more to it." In that brief moment, I felt the urge to tell her everything, to open the floodgates of pain and let someone from outside that house of horror know what was happening. But then I remembered what had happened the last time I tried to seek help. "I'm just tired," I said, eyes fixed on the old wooden floor of the classroom. "Things at home are busy since grandfather passed." It wasn't entirely a lie. There was more work. My father decided that since I wanted to be a woman, I should take on all the household chores to help my mother, who was spending more time sewing for others, trying to bring in extra income after losing grandfather's pension. Margaret didn't seem fully convinced, but she didn't press. She just gently squeezed my shoulder and said, "If you need to talk, I'm here." I nodded, knowing I would never take her up on it. Some things are too heavy to share, too shameful to voice. At home, I developed a survival system. I learned to recognize the signs of danger. How my father slammed the door when he came home, the number of empty bottles in the sink, the tone in his voice when he called my name. I learned to make myself invisible when needed, hiding in corners, sleeping with a chair against my bedroom door. My mother and I rarely spoke about what happened that night after the funeral, or about what continued to happen on the nights. He came home drunk from the bar and sought me out in the middle of the night. There was a silent pact between us, an understanding that speaking of it would make it more real, more unbearable. But on some nights, when he finally passed out, she'd come to my room. She'd sit on the edge of my bed, stroke my tear-soaked hair, and whisper, "One day, this will end. My daughter, one day, we'll leave here." I wanted to believe her. I wanted so much to believe there was a future beyond those walls, beyond that daily horror. But as days turned to weeks and weeks to months, hope faded like water in a drought. In September of that year, nearly 3 months after my grandfather's passing, things got worse. One afternoon, when I got home from school, I found my mother crying in the kitchen, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "What's wrong?" "Mother?" I asked, dropping my books on the table, my heart racing with familiar fear. She looked up, and I saw her left eye swollen shut, a dried blood streak at the corner of her mouth. "Your father found out," she began. Her voice choked. I realized I'd been saving a little money each month from my sewing work. I hid it in an empty grease can at the back of the cabinet. My heart sank. I knew exactly what that money meant. It was our chance to escape that hell. He beat me, took it all, and went to the bar. She continued, wiping her face with her sleeve. He said if I tried hiding money again, it would be much worse. I felt a rage so intense it took my breath away. This wasn't the first time I'd felt angry at my father. That feeling had grown in me for years, like weeds in an abandoned yard. But seeing my mother's bruised face, her hands shaking from overwork and getting so little in return, that rage turned into something darker, more dangerous. Let's go, Mother, I said impulsively, grabbing her hand. Right now, we don't need money. We can walk to town, ask someone for help, do anything. She shook her head sadly. It's not that simple. My girl, where would we go? Who would shelter a woman with a daughter without money? Without a steady job? He'd find us. He has friends everywhere. Knows people in the police. They'd bring us back. And it would be so much worse. The harsh truth in her words hit me like a slap. She was right. In America, in the 1950s, a separated woman was seen as a disgrace. Failure. Doors would close on us. Tongues would wag, and the law almost always sided with the husband. The father, the man of the house. It was like trying to escape a trap that held not just our bodies, but our souls. Or dignity. Our future. So we're stuck here forever, I asked. My voice choked with despair. Are we just going to let him keep doing this to us until... I didn't need to finish. We both knew where that road led. No, my mother replied, her voice unusually firm. Not forever. I'm thinking of something else. Another plan. But it will take time and has to be careful. He can't suspect anything. She didn't tell me more that day. Maybe she was afraid that if I knew too much, I might slip up. Maybe she wanted to protect me from the burden of that knowledge. Whatever the reason, I respected her silence, holding on to the belief that for the first time in a long while, there might still be a spark of hope. In the weeks that followed, I noticed small changes in my mother's behavior. She started going out more to deliver her sewing, sometimes taking longer than usual. She began attending church more often, not just on Sundays but on weekday evenings. And strangely, she became overly attentive to my father. In the corner of the room, I gently wiped my eyes with a handkerchief as the sergeant said, "Mrs. Clara," and came closer to the bed. He told me he knew I was still recovering, but he needed to ask some questions about the fire. My mother nodded, her face becoming serene and almost resigned. From what we understood so far, your husband came home from the bar around midnight. Quite a drunk. Could you confirm that? Yes, my mother replied, her voice hoarse from the smoke. He had gotten his paycheck from the sawmill and went to celebrate at the bar, just like he did every month. And were you home alone? The girl was at her teacher's house. That's right. I had asked Eleanor to go out that night because she hesitated, glancing at me. Since Henry got more difficult on those nights after he received his pay, the sergeant nodded as if he understood without needing more details. And as far as you remember, how did the fire start? My mother looked away, staring out the window at a patch of blue sky. Henry was so drunk he could barely stand. She began speaking slowly, as if reliving each moment in her memory. I helped him lie down and took off his shoes. He spilled a bottle of liquor on the bedroom floor, and everything was soaked. I lit a lamp because the power was out, which often happened during heavy rain. I placed it on the bedside table and went into the kitchen to get a cloth to wipe the floor. She paused, taking a deep breath, as if the next words were especially hard to say. When I got back to the room, the lamp had fallen onto the bed. I didn't know if he hit it when he rolled over or if the wind blew it through the open window. All I know is that when I saw the flames, they had already spread to the mattress and the curtains. I tried to put it out. I swear I did my best. I threw water on it and beat it with a rug. But I called Henry to help, and he wouldn't wake up. Her voice faltered, and I thought she might cry. But when she looked up again, her eyes were dry and full of determination. When I realized I couldn't control the fire, I ran outside to get help from the neighbors. Mr. Sam tried to go in and save Henry. But the flames had taken over the whole room. There was nothing more we could do. The sergeant wrote everything in his little notebook, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he closed the notebook and put it in his pocket. Yes, it all points to a tragic accident, he concluded, especially considering your husband's history of drinking. I didn't doubt it when the Columbus Fire Department's report confirmed this version after their investigation. Something made me look more closely at the sergeant's face. There was an unspoken understanding in his words, an acceptance that seemed almost convenient for the story. It wasn't until many years later, when I was grown up and Sergeant Carter had retired, that he confessed to me during a chance meeting at a Sunday service that he had never fully believed the story about the lamp falling. He had seen suspicious signs that the fire might have started from multiple points in the house, and he found it odd that my mother sent me out that night. But you know, Eleanor, he told me decades later, back then there were no laws against domestic violence and no police stations for women. Men like your father, who beat their wives and children and drank away the family's money. And no one did anything about it. Sometimes justice has to take the winding paths when the straight ones are blocked. But on that day in the hospital in 1957, I was just a confused girl trying to understand what really happened, what my mother did or didn't do, and how we would go on from there. I'll arrange the necessary paperwork, the sergeant said before leaving. You'll need the death certificate to handle the pension issues at the sawmill. Your husband was registered, so you're entitled to it. Pension. That word opened up possibilities we never thought were real. The monthly money would be ours without anyone spending it on drinking or gambling. After the sergeant and Miss Margaret left, It was just us in the room. The other patients had been taken for exams, giving us a rare moment of privacy. "Mom," I began, my voice hesitant and almost a whisper. What really happened last night? She held my hand tightly, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity I rarely saw. Exactly as I told the sergeant, she answered firmly, even though she was terrified. "A terrible accident. A tragedy that could have been avoided if your father hadn't drunk so much. A lamp falling in the wrong place at the wrong time." There was something in her eyes, a silent plea for me to accept this version, never to question it, never to doubt, never to seek another truth. And now, what will we do? I asked, changing the subject to respect that unspoken request. Her expression softened, and a small smile appeared on her cracked lips. "Now, my daughter, we will truly live for the first time. The house is gone, but we'll build another one with the insurance money your father had from the sawmill and the pension. A small house, but it'll be ours. You'll continue your studies. You'll graduate. You'll become what your grandfather always wanted for you in life. And what about you? I'll keep sewing. But now I can charge fairly. Not just what your father allowed. I can save money without fear. I can sleep without fear. Wake up without new bruises. I can breathe. Eleanor, after all those years, I can finally breathe." On that hospital bed, injured and covered in soot, with a voice still raspy from smoke, my mother had never seemed so strong, so beautiful, and so alive. 3 days later, she was discharged. Since our house had been completely destroyed by the fire, Miss Margaret took us in temporarily. News of my father's tragic death spread quickly through the small town. Reactions were mixed. Some people were genuinely saddened. Others barely hid their relief. Many pretended to be surprised by an ending that deep down everyone expected for a man who lived like he did. The funeral was brief. Only a few attended some co-workers from the sawmill, the bar owner where he spent his pay, and 2 or 3 distant relatives we hadn't seen in years. My mother wore black and stayed silent throughout the service, her face veiled to hide any emotions she might or might not feel. I didn't shed a single tear, not even one, in that moment. Looking at the simple coffin being lowered into the ground in the small town cemetery, I felt no hate or love, just a strange emptiness, like a page had turned to a new chapter. A dark chapter closed forever. What none of us knew then was that when one chapter ends, another brighter, more hopeful one is just beginning. A chapter that would take me down paths I never imagined, even in my wildest dreams. It truly started a few days after the funeral, when the sawmill's lawyer called us to handle the legal matters. That's where we discovered something surprising. My father, despite all his flaws, had updated his life insurance through the company. The insurance, along with the accident compensation and the monthly pension we received, not only gave us immediate stability, but also the opportunity for a new dignified beginning. It seems that even in his worst actions, God finds a way to turn them into blessings, my mother commented as we left the lawyer's office. With a substantial check in hand and the promise of monthly payments, we could live without luxury but with dignity. That same day, as we walked down the main street of town, we passed a small house with a for sale sign. It was a simple brick building with a little yard and a dogwood tree. My mother stopped, looked at it for a long time, and then did something I hadn't seen her do in years. She smiled, a full smile that reached her eyes. "What do you think? Eleanor, could that be our new home?" A week later, the house was ours, small and simple, but truly ours. The first place we could call home without fear, without violence, without the constant weight of oppression. And right there in that little house under the dogwood tree, we shared many study afternoons, many shared dreams, and many laughs that my mother and I finally set free as we rebuilt not just our lives but our souls. That's where I learned that miracles don't always come with trumpets or angelic choirs. Sometimes they come quietly, disguised as tragedies, as accidents, as a malescrio. They come in a lamp, falling on a windy night at the exact moment we need them most. And in that small but light-filled house, my mother taught me the greatest lesson, that justice, when it doesn't come from human hands, sometimes has to come from the hands of the most suffering, even if the price is carrying the weight of a secret that can never be fully revealed. Because some secrets, my dear ones who are following me, aren't meant to be told. They're made to be kept in the silence of the heart, to be taken to the grave as a final act of protection for those we love. And if today, at age 82, in the last legal year of my life with a few months left, I decide to finally share this story, it's not to judge what was done or not done on that distant November night. It's just so you know that even in the darkest nights, even when every door seems closed, a silent miracle might be forming in the shadows, waiting for the exact moment to reveal itself. People say God writes straight with crooked lines. In my journey, those lines were so crooked they almost broke. But God's writing goes on, unceasing, guiding me to a destiny I never imagined. For a poor girl from a small town in Indiana, the spring of 1958 brought more than flowers to our new life. It brought possibilities. With the insurance money and the pension, my mother managed to set up a small sewing shop in the living room of our new house. It wasn't anything grand, just a better sewing machine than the old one, a wooden mannequin, and some good fabric. But it symbolized something more valuable than money: independence, Clara's tailor, the modest sign we put up in front of the house. Soon, women in town started coming, first out of curiosity, then for the quality of the work. My mother had blessed hands that turned fabric into dreams. Wedding dresses that made young women sigh, baby outfits that filled future mothers' eyes with hope, and suits tailored to bring dignity to simple men on special occasions. And interwings, gradually learning the secrets of needle and thread. But my mother always emphasized, "You can help me, but your studies come first. Your duty isn't to fabric, it's to books." And with books, I devoted myself completely, surprising even my teacher. Miss Margaret remained an important figure in our lives. After school, she often invited me to stay a bit longer, lending me books from her small personal library and editing my writings with more care than her professional duty required. She was the first to recognize my drawing talent, a legacy from my grandfather that I had quietly nurtured. Sketching imaginary houses, fantastical buildings, entire cities that existed only in my mind. "This isn't just a hobby, Eleanor," she said one day as she looked at my drawings of beautiful villas on the margins of my notebook. "You have a keen eye for space and form. Have you thought about architecture?" Architecture. Those words sounded like music to my ears. Up until then, my dreams were vague. I knew I wanted to learn and become someone in life, as my grandfather had said. But I didn't have a specific goal or a clear path to follow. "But that's for the rich, isn't it, teacher?" I asked, my skepticism about poverty ingrained in my worldview. "Even a Fempton, it's a tough course." "Yes," she admitted, "but not impossible. There are scholarships, is public universities, and you're smart enough." Eleanor, having someone believe in you and your abilities is a new kind of comfort. That night when I got home, I told my mother about the conversation and this newly discovered dream. Expected hesitation, maybe even a gentle reminder of our financial reality. Instead, I saw her eyes light up with the determination I knew well. "If that's what you want, my daughter, then that's what you'll have," she said, her calloused hands holding mine. "I'll work twice as hard. I'll save every penny, but you'll get that degree." The years that followed were years of hard work. For her at the sewing machine, often late into the night. For me, it was books, studying beyond what school required. I finished junior high as the top student, and we celebrated with a simple corn cake. But our hearts were full of pride. High school meant going to a nearby city, larger and an hour's bus ride away. The extra travel costs strained our budget even more. But my mother never complained. "It's an investment, not an expense," she always said when I expressed worries about money. It was at that new school, more demanding with teachers trained at the state's best universities, that my vision truly expanded. There, I encountered new ideas, authors I'd never heard of, and sciences I didn't even know existed. There, I also faced my first serious resistance to my dream of architecture. My math teacher laughed when I mentioned my goal in geometry class. "Girl, there are no female architects around here. That's a man's field. Why not think of something more suitable, like an elementary teacher or a nurse?" Those words stung like a slap, reminding me of my father and how he always insisted my place was in the kitchen. Not with books. For a moment, the old fears returned, the feeling of not belonging. But then I remembered the promise I made to my grandfather years ago under the apple tree, that I would never let them tell me what I couldn't do. I also remembered what my mother said the night of the fire: "We will live." Truly. With all due respect, "Sire," I replied, my voice firmer than I thought possible. "If there are no female architects around here, then I'll be the first one." The room went silent. Some classmates chuckled. Others looked at me in astonishment. But in the eyes of some girls, I saw something different, a spark of admiration, maybe even hope. Surprisingly, the teacher wasn't angry. After class, he called me aside and said, "If you really want this, you'll have to be better than any man in the room. Twice as good. It's unfair. But that's the reality." That conversation, instead of discouraging me, fueled a stronger fire in me. I started studying math and physics with almost obsessive dedication. I began spending weekends at the city library, devouring books on architectural history, great structures around the world, and basic engineering principles. Around that time, religion entered my life more deeply. Our small town was Protestant, and I always went to church on Sundays with my mother, more out of habit than true faith. But after all we'd been through, after the miracle that freed us, I started seeking a deeper connection. There was a small chapel near our house where an elderly pastor, Pastor Nathaniel, held services on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I began attending those quieter services, drawn to the peace of the place and the ability to truly talk to God without the distractions of a crowded church. Pastor Nathaniel noticed my regular presence, and one day after service, he called me over for a chat. He was a simple man with calloused hands like my grandfather's, faded blue eyes, and wisdom born not from seminary books, but from the hard life he'd lived before being called to the ministry. "What are you seeking with such thirst, child?" he asked me in that first conversation. "Understanding, Pastor," I answered honestly. I wanted to know why God allows so much suffering only to bring relief in unexpected ways. He smiled as if he recognized something specific in my vague words. "God doesn't cause suffering, my daughter. He just weaves good from the tangled threads that we humans create with our free will. Our ability to choose right or wrong." Those words touched something deep in me. In the weeks and months that followed, I returned to talk with the pastor many times. I never spelled out the abuse from my father, the suspicious fire, or the secrets my mother and I carried. But somehow, through our conversations about faith, forgiveness, and God's justice, he felt he understood. It was he who gave me my first personal Bible, a small black-covered edition that I still keep today. Its yellowed pages are marked with my youthful notes. He also taught me to pray, not just with memorized words, but from the heart, true faith. He once told me, isn't believing God will do everything we want. It's believing that no matter what happens, He'll be with us, guiding and supporting, turning even the worst situations into opportunities for growth. This deeper understanding of spirituality helped me process my past traumas, forgiveness, not because what happened was forgivable, but because it's necessary for my own liberation, so I could move forward without the burden of hatred. In 1961, at 18, I took the entrance exam for the Architecture and Urban Planning program at Indiana University. It was a dream that seemed almost impossible for a country girl. The daughter of a seamstress with no connections or resources for expensive prep courses. On the day of the exam, my mother woke up before dawn to prepare a hearty breakfast. She said it was to nourish that special mind of mine, setting out cornbread, homemade bread, fruit. A simple feast made with so much love that it moved me. Before I left, she gave me something wrapped in a silk handkerchief, the only valuable thing she owned, a gift from her childhood. "What is this, Mom?" I asked as I unwrapped it. "It's a medal of St. Samuel, the patron saint of workers, families, and fathers. The saint my grandfather always prayed to. It was his," she explained, her eyes glistening with tears. "He said Saint Joseph protected him at work and gave him strength in hard times. I want you to take it today so he can be present in this important moment." I pinned the medal inside my blouse, feeling the cool metal against my skin like a promise. The connection to the first man who believed in my potential, even when I was too young to understand what that meant. The exam was tough and exhausting, testing not just my knowledge, but my mental endurance. When I finished, I wasn't sure of the results. I only knew I'd given it my all, answering every question with the determination of someone who knew this might be my only chance. The weeks of waiting were agonizing. My mother pretended to be calm, but I saw her lighting candles and praying more than usual, anxiously watching for the mail each day. When the letter from the university finally arrived, my hands shook so much I could barely open the envelope. My mother was beside me, just as nervous. But she tried to be strong as always. "Whatever God wants," she said, squeezing my hand. "If not this time, we'll try again next year." But it was, yes. The words "accepted" and "classified" appeared on the paper like a victory cry. I didn't just pass. I got one of the top spots, securing a place in the most competitive daytime program. My mother let out a yell that the whole neighborhood must have heard. She hugged me so tightly, we almost fell over. And then we started dancing around the room, laughing and crying. Startling, even the cat sleeping on the chair. "Your grandfather is watching this from heaven," she said through joyful tears. "He's so proud of his granddaughter." That night, we did something we'd never done before. We went out to dinner, not to a fancy restaurant, since our town didn't even have one, but to the only diner in the central square. We ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, a steak with fries that we shared, and a cold Coca-Cola. a rare luxury back then, to the future architect of the family. My mother toasted, her eyes shining with pride. To the best mother in the world, I replied, swallowing the lump in my throat. The one who turned the impossible into possible for me to get here. But the biggest challenge was still ahead. The university was in Bloomington, nearly 100 miles from our small town. Moving to the city would require money we didn't have and a separation we'd never experienced. How will we manage this? Mom, I asked that night, the initial excitement giving way to practical worries. We'll find a way, she answered with the calm certainty that always impressed me. That's how we've always done it. Haven't we? And we did. In the months that followed, my mother worked even more at the shop, taking on extra orders and sewing late into the night. I got a part-time job at the town's only stationery store. Saving every penny of my small wages, surprisingly, the community rallied to help. When news of my acceptance to Indiana University spread, I became a local celebrity, Clara's daughter, the one who's going to be an architect in Bloomington, people said with a mix of surprise and pride, as if my achievement was a win for the whole town. Pastor Nathaniel organized a raffle to cover initial costs. The stationery store owner where I worked donated supplies. Miss Margaret gave me a new suitcase for moving. Even Sergeant Carter contributed, showing up one day with an envelope containing the first month's rent. That unity showed me that despite all the hardships, all the traumas and losses, I was blessed with an extraordinary mother, true friends, and a community that, in its simple way, valued education and effort. In February 1962, I boarded the bus to Bloomington, carrying a simple suitcase of clothes, school supplies, the Bible the pastor gave me, my grandfather's St. Samuel medal, and a heart divided between excitement for the future and sadness at leaving my mother. "It's not goodbye," she said to me at the bus stop, holding my face in her hands as she did when I was little. "Just see you later. I'll visit whenever I can. And you'll come back for holidays. And when you graduate, who knows, maybe you'll open your own office right here, building beautiful houses for our people." In my first months in Bloomington, I lived in a modest boarding house near the campus, sharing a room with 2 other students, one studying medicine and the other literature. The culture shock was huge. The big city with its towering buildings, frantic pace, and anonymous crowds was a whole different world from peaceful Millbrook. The university was a big challenge too. I was one of the few women in the architecture program, and certainly one of the few with a humble background. Most of my classmates came from wealthy families, had attended the best schools, traveled abroad, and seen architectural wonders I only knew from books. In the early days, I felt out of place, so inadequate that I thought about giving up. I wrote a distressed letter to my mother, confessing my insecurities and fears of not fitting in. A week later, she replied, "And I still keep that yellowed paper. My beloved daughter, the fears you're feeling are natural. Great things always scare us at first. I remember when you were learning to walk. You fell, cried, but got up and tried again, until one day you were running around the yard without thinking of the falls. This university is your new challenge, but you have a strength inside you that's much greater than you imagine. A strength forged in hardships that your wealthy classmates have never known. They may have traveled the world, but you've survived hell and come out of it with your head held high. That's your advantage, my daughter, one that no money can buy. As for not fitting in, remember that you passed the same exam as them, sat in the same room, answered the same questions. Your place there wasn't given. It was earned. Now take a deep breath. After and show them, and especially yourself, that Eleanor Rose Thompson is capable of it all. With all my love and pride, your mother. That letter changed something fundamental in me. I taped it to the wall of my room, and in moments of doubt, which were many, I read her words and reignited my determination. My college years were intense, challenging, and transformative. I studied more than everyone, slept less than most, and seized every learning opportunity. On weekends, while my classmates went to parties, I stayed in the library, reading not just about architecture, but also art, history, and philosophy, building knowledge I never had the chance to before. In my third year, I received a research scholarship, which eased the financial pressure a bit. In my fourth year, I started interning at a small architecture firm, gaining practical experience and some extra money so I could rent a room of my own. Small but private. My mother visited every 3 months, always bringing homemade cornbread, clothes she sewed especially for me, and the unconditional love that was my greatest strength. During breaks, I returned to Millbrook, helped at the shop, reunited with a few friends who stayed in town, and visited Pastor Nathaniel for long talks about faith and purpose. In those college years, my faith deepened. In Bloomington, I joined a young Christian group at a church near my boarding house. There, I found not just spiritual comfort, but true friendships, people who shared my core values, even with completely different life stories. In December 1966, at 23, I graduated with a degree in architecture and urban planning from Indiana University. On graduation day, as they called my name, and I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I saw my mother in the audience, elegant in the navy blue dress she'd sewn for the occasion. Her eyes were teary, her hands clapping as enthusiastically as if to make up for the absence of my grandfather. My father, who never valued me, and all those who didn't believe that moment was possible.